Michael Massa. Exploring the alleged connection between the 12 tribes of Israel and Bantu tribes Part 2. The Kingdom of Makoko. The Makoko Kingdom was founded at the end of the 17th century. It was a large territory located north of the Nzaidi River, Zaire, northeast of the Kingdom of Congo, about 1,000 kilometers from Longo and Congo. It was populated by the ancestors of the Batiks, Atik, Teo, Tayo, Tik, Tika. They were then called Bansitu, which means people of the bush. The king was called Grand Makoko. Among his people, the Makoko was considered a humble, upright, and moral man. During his enthronement, he was stripped of all his possessions. On the other hand, he was considered by his neighbors to be very powerful and bloodthirsty, because he had 10 kings for vassals, then Kobe, and did not hesitate to have 200 men executed a day in his palace, the majority of whom were criminals, and the others slaves. The first capital was Ngabe, then later Mbe. In reality, the kingdom changed capital each time the king died, and the designation of the capital by the word Mbe, gathering of great leaders, became an institution. The monarch's fortune consisted of slaves or longo shells or cowries, formerly used for trade. They came from the Maldive Islands and Zanzibar, or even small pieces of cloth. Forced to constantly watch his northern border, threatened by the king of the Yaka, he developed a war technique which consisted of spinning their hatchet very quickly, the handle of which was half shorter than iron and its lower part was fitted with a ball to ensure a better grip. The handle was entirely covered with snakeskin. The iron part. The Kingdom of Dongo and Matamba, Angola. The history of the creation of this kingdom seems linked to that of an extraordinary famine which struck the territory of the Bantu a little before the 9th century. It is said in Dongo country that a man named Ngola Mujuri had received the ability to model iron from his master and to make all the instruments needed, either for agriculture, or for war, or for everyday uses. And that at that time, trade was only based on exchanges. We all exchanged what we owned for food from the harvest or for animal skins. As everyone needed Ngola's services, he became very rich. He built large stores, in which he stored all kinds of vegetables and other food that had been given to him in exchange for his works. It seems that he was very liberal and demanded a reasonable reward for his work. When the famine arrived, Ngola opened his stores and generously distributed his provisions to the starving poor. His charity saved their lives. Having no other way to show him their gratitude, the inhabitants decided by common agreement to elect him king. He therefore became the first king of the Ndongo kingdom. Subsequently, the kingdom will take its name and become the Ngolandongo kingdom. This king reigned without great pomp and limited himself to ensuring the happiness of his people. At his death, it was his second successor, Ngola Enin, who would modernize the country and baptize the kingdom with the name of Angola, Angola, that is to say, subjects of Ngola. Then came the reign of Ngola Kiluanji in the 15th century. He extended his influence to Matamba and was consecrated king of the Mbundas in Dongo and Matamba. He resisted the Portuguese expansion by taking refuge in Kabasa, Matamba. The political structure of the kingdom was made up of large units called kanda and provinces. The capital of Ndongo was Kabasa. To govern, the king had at his disposal 4 essential organs: a council of nobles composed of heads of provinces, Makota, a judicial body headed by a notable, Tendala, a military administrator sort of general in charge of war, and at the top was the Kalunda representing an ersatz government with the Kudia at its head, administrator. The social structure was based on children, Murinda, or free commoners. This kingdom practiced slavery, so in the population, it was necessary to distinguish the slaves called Mubika and the serfs, Kijiko, who were free men. The Mubika were mainly employed to work the land and were transferable, which was not the case for the Kijiko. The Bamalik Kingdom. The socio-political structure of the Bamalik Kingdom was made up of the chief, the notables, the free men and the slaves. At the top of the empire, we find the king, called Efo or Fong, absolute monarch. He holds extensive temporal power, surrounded by divine prestige. The accession of the king to the throne was done after an initiation course. All the land assets belonged to him. The foe's successor was chosen from among his biological sons. In reality, it was the foe during his lifetime who had the task of choosing who would succeed him among his children. However, this choice was to remain secret. He revealed it only to 3 or 4 great notables, members of the royal council, who swore to respect his will after his death. The choice of the foe did not obey the logic of the birthright, because he was free to choose among all his sons. When the Fong died, the royal council met to organize the ceremony during which the choice of the deceased would be revealed to the people. During this public ceremony, the great notables placed in the court all the sons of the deceased king. In the middle of the ceremony, they came to catch the one who had been designated by the deceased foe. The chosen one was immediately taken to the laikam for his initiation, which lasted 9 weeks. The first weeks were devoted to the study of the history of the chiefdom and the role of the chief, rights and duties. Then he was initiated by the great masters in the mastery of the world, invisible forces. The last week was devoted to the use of the royal regalia, the choice of notables and advisors who were to accompany the king in his ministry. During these 9 weeks the king was surrounded by 8 young girls. Officially they took care of the household, the meal, but in reality, their role was to test the virility of the king, but also to know if he was procreative. Because at the end of the 9 weeks, if one of them was not pregnant, the elected king was dismissed by the royal council, which chose another from among the brothers of the fallen king. The latter was simply physically removed. The queen mother, Mafo, enjoys a religious prestige which exceeds that of the king and which she outclasses in authority. She was essential within the kingdom, and jealously watched over the interests of her son, especially the first year of his reign. Noble women in general enjoy great power, especially if they are heirs. In the lower classes, women only have the status of objects of exchange. As for the royal council, it was made up of 9 dignitaries. Below are the priests, chinda, and servants, wala. In the villages, the crowds are the representatives of the king. The Bamalik civilization is powerfully original. Marriage is exogamous. Monotheism, the worship of ancestors, whose skulls are buried under the bed, are the main features of the religion. This cult is grafted onto the family structure. The son designated as successor received with the house, the land, and the women, the skulls of his lineage. The cult of skulls allows communication with deceased relatives, and is based on the belief that the dead have a possibility of action on the living. Architectural and sculptural art manifests a proliferation of inventions and a creative verve, as well as an incomparable plastic vigor. The Bamaun Kingdom. The structure of the Bamaun Kingdom is based on an urban civilization. The Bamauns are from the Tikar country. To protect himself from the attacks of the Poles, the conqueror Mbyumbu, 1757–1814, had a wall and ditches built around the capital. The Bamaun Kingdom was founded by Njoya, son of a Tikar chief who left his tribe with a group of people heading south, with the firm intention of conquering new lands. On his way, he did not hesitate to drive out the other populations, Tikar and Bamalik. He settled about 20 kilometers from Fumban, and had himself enthroned king of the Pombam after having defeated 18 chiefs. It would seem that the name Bamaun comes from the word Pombam. But it was one of his successors, a certain Bombovo, who, when he came to power towards the end of the 18th century, was the real organizer of this people. He consolidated his kingdom by incorporating and assimilating the natives whom he moved a few times to Fumban. Njoya the 16th Bamaun suzerain, 17th in reality because there was an ephemeral king named Ngaungor whose reign lasted only 30 minutes in all and for all, acceded to the throne around 1883 after the regency of his mother Nzabndaunk. Indeed, his father Nsangu, a great warrior, before going into battle had a presentiment. He decided to appoint his successor in case he did not come back alive. What he did and chose the young Njoya, then barely 4 years old. The choice of the young man among more than 40 sons, some of whom were able succeeding him, was risky. Especially since the king did not return alive from his campaign. The child, who was too young to reign, had to leave the regency to his mother. Nzabndaunk in power was of unprecedented authoritarianism and cruelty. This state of affairs exacerbated the hatred of the other sons wishing to take power. They contested the power of the little one and fomented many plots to push a group of local rebels to revolt. So much so that the capital Fumban was on fire and bloodshed for 2 years. Njoya, who took office at the age of 15, had the upper hand only thanks to the intervention of the Fulani horsemen of Lamido de Banio. In return, the Lamido demanded for his victorious intervention a heavy booty which included among other things 15,000 captives and 9 young girls. King Njoya, as a cunning suzerain, granted them to him voluntarily. However, he did not fail to set a trap for the delegation on the way back and thus recovered the majority of his gifts. A little. Historical scholars who have contributed to the understanding of biblical narratives and the history of African kingdoms come from various academic backgrounds, including biblical studies, archaeology, anthropology, history, and African studies. Here are some notable scholars who have made significant contributions in these fields. David M. Goldenberg, known for his work on the historical origins of the Israelites and the interactions between ancient Israel and its neighbors. John Pearman Brown, a scholar of ancient Near Eastern history and biblical studies, particularly focusing on the Hebrew Bible and its historical context. Roland Oliver, renowned for his research on African history and the pre-colonial kingdoms of Africa. Joseph C. Miller, a historian specializing in African history, particularly West African history and the Atlantic slave trade. Christopher Ehret, known for his research on African history, linguistics, and the Bantu migrations. John G. Jackson, a historian who wrote extensively on African history, including the history of ancient African civilizations. Davidson Nicol, a Sierra Leonean historian and diplomat who contributed to the understanding of African history and culture. J.D. Fage, noted for his work on the history of Africa, including studies on pre-colonial African kingdoms. Molafai Keita Santi, there are no translations available. Kwame Anthony Appiah, a philosopher and cultural theorist who has written on African history and identity. These scholars, among others, have conducted research, written books and articles, and contributed to academic discussions that deepen our understanding of biblical narratives, African history, and the connections between the two. Their works serve as valuable resources for anyone interested in exploring these topics further.